Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Don't you just hate it? Every time you switch on the TV, scroll through Facebook, or read a newspaper, it's Muslims have done this and Muslims have done that. They're barbaric, this religion is dangerous, etc., etc., etc. The saddest thing is that so many people out there believe it. It's people like you and I who need to dismantle these misconceptions by showing how beautiful Islam is. If it wasn't for such amazing dawah organizations out there, many people wouldn't be Muslim today. One such amazing organization is the Islamic Diversity Center. For over 17 years now, they've been building bridges within communities and calling people towards Islam through education, awareness, engagement, and empowerment. Their amazing work has resulted in hundreds of people accepting Islam and thousands more understanding that Islam is not about killing and murder. Rather, it is a peaceful religion full of understanding, harmony, and worship. In order to continue guiding the masses, they urgently need to raise £50,000. That's just 500 people donating £100 each. Now, as Muslims, if we can't sacrifice our time and resources to call people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then at least we should sacrifice a tiny percentage of our wealth, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with. Please donate £100 today and earn Sadaqah Jariyah on your scale of good deeds from now until the end of the Day of Judgment, where your only hope of entering Jannah is through the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Please, lastly, hit the share button. Wajazakumullahu khair.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're watching Newcastle Fast FM. This is the Late Show Live with your host Abu Tayeb and your co-host Ajaz Rafi. Assalamu alaikum, Jazzy.
Walaikum salam. How's it going, man?
I'm good, man. How are you, bro?
Not bad, man. Time and day today, like.
It's been what?
It's been a long day today, man.
It has been a long day. And why has it been a long day, bro?
Well, we got two young boys, bro. Every day's a long day.
Try having teenagers, brother. Then you'll know what a long day is, yeah? Okay, we've already got one comment. Brother Ayman Hamami Qadri says, Wa alaikum assalam. Assalamu alaikum, my brother Ayman. I hope you're well. Make sure you like and share this this live stream, inshallah. We're gonna have a decent show for you tonight, inshallah. We're gonna discuss a number of different things. We've got our special guest coming on a little bit later on this evening, Brother Abdul Haq Ash-Shanti. He's going to be joining us to talk about his book. Let me show you what his book is. Can you see that? I don't know if you can read it. Yeah. Defining Legends. Can you see that? Defining Legends. Yeah, and its actual full title is An Analysis of Afrocentric Writings Against Islam. So we're going to be talking about some of the, we're going to have a bit of a discussion about some of the arguments that people have against Islam and why Abdul Haq chose to write this book. In fact, this book, from what I understand, we're going to get checked with him. It's basically been in the making for many, many years, and he's compiled it all together. I think he started it from back when he was in SOAS University, but we're going to discuss that in a short time, inshallah, as soon as he comes out. So let's talk about, today we've been having our fundraiser for Islamic Diversity Center. And one of the things is that the discussions that were taking place today, today was mainly focusing on the new Muslim support element that we have as part of our da'wah. And I think this is important to highlight and make clear. when we do dawah, or anyone who's involved in dawah, any dawah center, any dawah organization, whether it's a masjid, whether it's a full-time dawah center like Islamic Diversity Center, or whether it's an individual even who is out there giving dawah, I think one of the main things that we have to remember is our new Muslim support and new Muslim infrastructure. I call it an infrastructure on purpose, because new Muslim support is more than just, helping someone take their shahada and teaching them the salah. It's a lot more than that. New Muslim infrastructure involves a whole number of things, which is there to not only help with the new Muslims' education, but also integration into the community. And I think that's important. But also there are other elements to it, because there are other types of support that's required for that new Muslim to have that safe journey in Islam through when they are, especially in the very early stages of their Islam. So we were talking about that today. The brothers were talking about that. Brother Richard, who's the head of the New Muslim Support Program for the Islamic Diversity Center, he was focusing especially on explaining why it's so important for people to support their new Muslims in their community, but also support organizations that have the ability and capability and experience to support their new Muslims. All right, so this is why there was a big call today for trying to get regular donations from the donors to give, try and give £10 a month. £10 a month. I think they worked it out to be something like 33 pence a day or something like that.
Yeah, not that much.
But £10 a month in order to support Islamic Diversity Center, to support the new Muslims that we look after. And you can do that in a number of ways. Number one is exactly what's on the screen there. You can see the easiest way is to text the word Islam to the number 70085, and then that will set up a regular £10 donation. You don't have to do anything else. Just simply text Islam to 70085, and then that will set it up automatically for you. If you want to go online and you want to do it through your bank account or a credit card or whatever card you've got, then you just simply go to idcsupporter.com, and then you will become an IDC supporter by donating regularly. Or if you just want to do a one-off donation, just click on supportidc.com and then make your one-off donation. Doesn't matter how much it is. Every little helps, as they say. I sound like an Asda advert, isn't it? Is it Asda?
Yes, good, bro.
Anyway, let's get to the show. Let's introduce our co-host Jamaal. Assalamu alaikum. How you doing, bro?
Wa alaikum salam. Alhamdulillah, AT. I'm not too bad. Just been really, really, really busy, subhanAllah. So forgive me for my absence, especially yesterday. But yeah, alhamdulillah, here today to support you, and hopefully, inshallah, whilst we're obviously dealing with the main topic of the show, hopefully we could do a little bit of a fundraising throughout as well, because obviously
inshallah,
I'm really keen on supporting the activities up in Newcastle, inshallah.
Yeah, man. I tell you what, today we had our fundraiser, as I was just mentioning as you joined, about the New Muslim Support Program that we have, because in my view, that is the probably one of the most important aspects of our organization. And we've had, so many brothers and so many sisters come through the door that have had nowhere else to go, and they haven't had any other support. So I think it's so important that every single city has a good quality New Muslim Support Program. So you know yourself, Jamaal, as a revert many years ago, how important that support is, and having some people or someone or a group of people who can support that. So give us your pitch, bro, on why people should support IDC, and especially the New Muslim Support Program.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, we had the brother on from Canada the other night, and he had this, his project, his initiative, which was for reverts, European reverts to, obviously to stick together pretty much, and not stick together. That's the wrong term, but obviously just somewhere for them to go. But obviously there were some issues. There's some good points. There's some bad points, or something like that. But what we do need is like the community collectively looking after reverts, right? So, because if you just depend or rely upon just like a small clique or small group to do something like that, then obviously that means that if it's not happening, then people can fall to the wayside and people can lose out. So, you know, to be fair, I mean, I was never really completely kind of in agreement or in support of, you know, that particular initiative, because I like things like, you know, like grassroots organizations like IDC who are there to help reverts. Doesn't matter what the nationality, the color, whatever it is. Just once you embrace the Deen of Islam, then we understand then that we have someone there who's going to look after you, to take care of you, to make sure that you have everything that you need. So that's the reason why, you know, it's really, really important for people to actually support you know, IDC, because it's a very simple thing. Whether it be like a one-off donation, or whether it be like a regular donation, which a regular donation is even better, because it's almost like you're sponsoring a new revert. You're looking after them, making sure they have everything they need. And I just think that now, especially in this lockdown period and this Ramadan, sometimes we kind of tend to forget how easy it is and how simple it is to make a donation. So, you know, people sit down and they watch programs like this, and they have the means to make a donation, but just to actually take that step to click those buttons and just do it, people need to understand it's such an easy thing to do, subhanAllah. So even in this like show tonight, it's a very simple thing. Just, you know, go visit the site. What are we going to do? Click the button, make a donation, and then, you know, even more importantly, just let us know that you've made a donation, and let other people know they made a donation as well, inshallah. But yes, it's very, very important indeed, to support new Muslims and an organization that are supporting new Muslims. I'm getting a bit tongue twisted. Been a long day, but alhamdulillah, I think you know what I mean.
And I think, you know, you mentioned, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we're losing you a little bit there.
Really?
Yeah, okay. I mean, there's something important that you mentioned there. It's something so simple and easy to do, but you know, people need to realize the impact is so great. The impact is so great when you make that easy step of donating. You know, I think that's the thing that people need to remember, really.
Yeah, exactly. The impact is absolutely great, because again,
you know what I mean? But yeah, so alhamdulillah.
Yeah, so sorry, bro. I think I've got a bad Wi-Fi connection. I might have to leave and join again, I think.
All right, no problem, inshallah.
I'll do that.
We've also got brother Hassan is on in the studio. How you doing, bro? Nice of you to join us.
Alhamdulillah. Made it on. Can you hear me?
Your first time this Ramadan. What's going on?
My connection, isn't it? All right. Can you actually hear me?
You've been hiding behind that excuse all month. You know that.
Yeah, obviously. I'm in another country, mate. I couldn't get further away. Is this working though? Because I don't think it's working, mate.
My guests have been in another country, yeah. But okay.
No, they're not in the desert, man. I'm in the desert, bro. Come on, man.
Doesn't look like the desert to me.
Not working,
okay, we got another comment. I know it looks like you're in a nice, comfy apartment, bro.
Yeah.
We've got another comment. Assalamu alaikum. By Ariba wa alaikum assalam. Make sure you like and share this stream so that people can join us. Yes, so sorry, Jamaal, bro. We were just saying before you went off that, you know, the support of new Muslims, I think people underestimate it a little bit. And I think one of the things is people tend to, I mean, you hear this all the time. People tend to, you know, downplay it a little bit and don't really give the necessary how can I put it, man? Don't put the work in that's necessary to support new Muslims as they should. Let's put it that way. I think it's because that's where the real work starts. Let's be honest, yeah. That's where the real work starts when it comes to the dawah.
And people forget the rewards that they get from supporting and helping new Muslims as well, because as they grow in their deen, and if they get supported by organizations like IDC, what that means is the more advanced that new Muslim becomes, maybe they might end up becoming teachers, scholars themselves. Think about the reward that person gets from helping to support someone like that. It's an amazing investment, subhanAllah. Such an amazing investment. Wow.
Absolutely. Alhamdulillah. It's absolutely true. I mean, talking about people who who were reverts and then went on to study and get knowledge and then grow in their religion, then go and teach. Imagine, I mean, you can't even just imagine the rewards of that. So, talking about that particular perspective, let me introduce our guest, Abdul Haq Kufi Al-Shanti, who's one of those brothers who, came to the Deen, invested time in studying the Deen, learning it, studying with scholars, and even translating books and articles, and then even benefiting the ummah as a result of that. So just think about the rewards of those who supported that all the way through, and if we have long-term support like that, we can basically create a crop, a new generation of du'at who are going to be, it's going to be a powerful generation of du'at. So I believe that, if we put the investment in like that. So that's why it's so important. I'm going to make one last plug before we introduce the guest, right? So that's why it's so important that you support organizations like IDC, and click on the link below where it says supportidc.com for one-off donations, or idcsupporter.com for regular donations. If it's too many clicking for you, then just simply go on your phone and text Islam to 70085 to set up a regular £10 donation, which will support the dawah and support the new Muslim program that we have up here in the Northeast. So there's only so many times you can say that. People have to just do it, basically, and get clicking, as it were. Anyway, let me introduce our guest, Abdul Haq. Assalamu alaikum. How are you doing, brother?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. How's everything going?
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, it's lurking in the shadows tonight, eh? Alhamdulillah. We've got a very special show. We're going to talk about your book today, right? So this is the important thing for tonight's show: Defining Legends, an analysis of Afrocentric writings against Islam. It's an interesting title, actually. Let's go straight into it. I mean, why did you write this book? What's the purpose behind it? What's the thinking behind it? When did you write it? How long did it take you to put this together? And what's the significance of it?
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man yattabihum bi ihsanin ila yawm ad-din, amma ba'd. Jazakallah khair again, jazakumullah khair, brothers Jamaal and Abu Tayeb, for hosting me in this session, and inshallah I'll be a beneficial session, inshallah.
It's a pleasure, big pleasure.
So this topic is quite a niche topic, actually. So in 2020 now, I first started researching this topic in about 97, 98. About 97, 98. And even I'd say I was sort of observing and making notes earlier than that. And when I came to Islam and I started to sort of study Islam more serious, so I'm talking about sort of 94, 95. I used to read a lot of books also to do with African history, Black history, and so forth. So I sort of would read these in conjunction when I would read about reading about Islam. And in some of the writings that I would read, especially some of the Black history books, in some of the authors were very critical about Islam, and I would make note of that. Even at that time, I thought that they were not necessarily being fully. I realized they weren't telling the full truth of the matter. But at the same time, I was never naive enough to be sort of susceptible to just accept anything. I always thought that there was probably in history things did happen which were not always in line with Islam. So then I started to. So I say when I started university in 97. I did history, so I majored in the history of Islam in Africa, and I studied African history. And then that gave me the opportunity to research these things in more detail, because I had more access to further literature, further resources, and could inspect and scrutinize more sources in English and Arabic as well. So then that's when I began to make more notes. I'd say that our first draft of it was in 1999. It wasn't complete then; it was only about 50 pages. And then I then began to add over the years. So the book was published a couple of years back, so or last year actually. So then over the last 20 years, I was adding bits of information, relevant information to do with issues to do with the Black experience in Islam. What's further evidence from Islamic scholars to do with issues like slavery, racism, and all these topics. And I wanted to get a lot of stuff in bulk in there to make it really detailed and comprehensive. And alhamdulillah, then I think I did an interview which was on YouTube with a brother, and then I think another brother in Birmingham saw the interview, and then he said that he wanted to publish. Alhamdulillah, it was one of the brothers Adnan from Dar al-Alqam in Birmingham, and they're well known for publishing a lot of classical Islamic translations. And he said, mashallah, it's a project he'd be happy to support, to publish. So I was, alhamdulillah. So, I mean, the book, it was at that time was about 400 pages. Alhamdulillah, it's good. It's a good work. May Allah reward the brother for coming forth.
I mean,
that.
This is about 20 years worth of work. Then this is a long time. This is basically almost like your life's work, right? That you've put together, and now it's been published as a book.
Yeah, I won't say it's my life's work, but I'd say that it's a topic which definitely over the years I haven't wanted to address it comprehensively, so there'll be a source text. So when the related topics come up to anyone in the communities around the world, especially in the West, then there's a text now. There's a book now which deals with some of those issues and some of those doubts which people come with.
That people can refer to. And I think it's interesting because you said it is a very niche area, but to be fair though, nowadays it started to become very popular in recent times to talk about these type of issues. If you look at, for example, I know that recently in Hyde Park, well, I say recently, but over the last few years, certainly, if you look at the Speaker's Corner, Hyde Park, you've got a group of people coming out who are really focusing on the whole, I don't even, they come from a perspective of where their whole foundation of their dawah is based upon identity politics and ethnicity and color of skin, and, even creating doubts with Muslims who are, who have African ancestry, and trying to put doubts in them to say, well, Islam isn't for you. This is your ancestral religion, and trying to make arguments like that to show that even as Black people within the Muslim community, and there is some truth to that actually, within the Muslim community there is some superiority and inferiority complexes, but they're trying to argue that within Islam, that Islam doesn't recognize Africans and people from those origins, and this is the arguments they're trying to make. So it's starting to become a bit more popular, that to try and create some of those doubts amongst Muslims.
Yeah, they've always been there. I mean, as I said, I've been observing it and making notes over the years. They've always been there, especially since the mid-90s, I'd say. I've seen it, and I've engaged those people who've had those arguments. So I've witnessed it over the years, people saying. And as I mentioned in the book, I kind of mentioned those authors who were pivotal in pushing that argument. People like Chancellor Williams, who wrote a book which is actually quite a terrible piece of historical writing called The Destruction of Black Civilization. And the cover of the book itself is not exactly... the cover of the book itself is entrenched in stereotypes, racial stereotypes of both Arabs and Africans, as it features an Arab on a horse with a sword fighting an African dressed in leopard skin with a spear. So the image itself, it just conjures up just total stereotypical. I mean, in a way, it's framed in such a way, totally ahistorical. There was while on the topic, there was no instance of Arabs getting into any battles with Africans in order to push Islam. It's similar to the Islam was spread by the sword. It's an extension of that argument. And as I said in one of our previous sessions, Abu Tayeb, is that what you notice is a lot of the people who push these, like, not just identity politics, but this like nationalist, extremist nationalist narrative, they all have the same themes, which is this religion, Islam, it's not from us, it's not from our ancestors. It came in via force. They removed, pillaged, and killed and forcibly made us enter this religion. And it was not the religion of our forefathers. I've seen this in the writings of Indian nationalists, Persian nationalists, Berber nationalists, and the Kemet Afrocentric nationalists, and as we've been discussing over the recent weeks, the white supremacist nationalists, all the same thing. They all mention the same kind of thing. They all unite upon, unbeknown to them, or maybe in some cases known to them, they all unite on this narrative about Islam came by force and they enforced us into this religion. And, they have all this imagery. Some of it's historical. They have certain individuals who they refer to. The Persians do it, the Berbers do it, and the black nationalists do it as well. You can hear me still, yeah?
I can still hear you, yeah.
So Afron. So it's all the same kind of theme, like rolled, and on all of these nationalisms, they all extremist nationalisms, they all have it. But there was no whole scale attack and invasion of Africa in that manner, as has been propagated. North Africa there was, and even in the case of East Africa and Nubia, when the early Muslims went there was a case of there being like some scattered skirmishes, and that's about it. Nothing to do with Islam being forced. You see what I'm saying? So
that's interesting, because the narrative is that, obviously, like you said, it's an extension of that whole idea of Islam was spread by the sword, and Islam was forced people to convert to the religion, when we know that is actually a false narrative. Historically, if you look at the historical text, the far right use this a lot, Jamaal, actually. They use this quite often, where they say that, it's the language. It's an invasion. It's a Muslim invasion of Europe, or it's the Arabization of Europe, and these type of the language that's being used. But as we've spoke to guests on this show, Jamaal, with Dr. Steph Kerris, with other historians and other people who have specialized in this sort of field. Abdul Haq was one of them who's talking about it. Actually, that narrative is false. It's not actually true or accurate. And when you dig down and study it in more depth, you realize that obviously there's a level of propaganda involved. There's a level of politics involved, I guess. But the reality is, when things are done by the Islamic tradition, by following Islam as it was, then the reality is most people who have sense and can and be objective about the whole thing will come to the conclusion that actually Islam came as a force of good, not as a force of evil. Islam came to restore people's rights and justice, because there's a big focus on justice. And in order to, and even if we look at the basic language of what the word Islam is, it's to submit oneself or surrender oneself to the will of God, to the will of Allah. And you can't force somebody to submit completely, right? It is a bit of a contradiction there. You can't force somebody to submit their will to something that they don't want to submit to, right? So that whole notion is a little bit skewed, I guess. It's a bit off and inaccurate.
Yeah, definitely, bro. I think if you look at it, you'll see that the people who are most kind of objectional towards Islam are those who what they had to lose, they were obviously being unjust anyway. So this is why anyone who was in a position of maybe a lower caliber, they would benefit more. But those who were greedy and were feeding off of the poor, those are the ones who would actually be more objectionable towards Islam. So, but as you said, obviously the way it was spread in history, it was done in a way where the people were actually more benefited from it. So this is absolutely clear. Alhamdulillah, we got Abdul Haq back, but he's looking very dark where he is, though.
MashaAllah. Abdul Haq, you know, once I brought you up about 10, 15 years ago to Newcastle, and you did a talk for us up in one of the universities on the topic of you know, slavery in Islam. And I remember that topic quite well. And and you clarified the whole position of, because there was a question around, you know, well, okay, well, if Islam didn't come by force and Islam didn't force people to convert in Africa, then why was it that the Arabs had you know, enslaved the Africans, and you know, they forced them to do this, and they treated them like that? So
Yeah.
what is, you know,
Very
you can I hear this a lot, you know, it's the Arabs say, you know, the Arabs enslaved the Africans just like the Europeans enslaved the Africans, right? And that's because they don't respect Africans, they don't treat them like human beings, and blah 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 and all that sort of stuff. Just give us a little synopsis. I know you talk about it in your book, but just give us a little explanation of that. How would you answer that question when it gets put to you about, you know, the whole Arab slavery compared to European slavery, and the way that the Africans were treated in history by certain Muslims?
Okay, there's definitely Bismillah. Okay, there's definitely is a you can observe throughout antiquity, not even just looking at the history of Islam, but even before it, prior to Islam, certain parts of Africa, probably more sort of, you could say, the East African coast, it was sort of viewed as like a reserve for slavery. But in the same way, it wasn't necessarily based upon race per se, because even in antiquity, certain parts of Europe also looked as reserves as slavery as well. I think this is something which sometimes the Afrocentrics don't take into consideration, or because it doesn't really fit the narrative of it doesn't fit the slavery narrative, is something which they don't mention. But parts of Europe, like Circassia, for example, they're blonde haired and blue eyed. That was a reserve for slavery as well. You see what I'm saying? The many civilizations had took people from there as slaves as well. That's the first thing. So now let's fast forward in Islam. Islam, you know, when during the time of the revelation, slavery was a system which was already manifest. So Islam's not happy with slavery. See what I'm saying? So Islam's not happy with slavery, but Islam cooperated or interacted, that's the best word, interacted in a world, in a context wherein slavery was present. And the Prophet ﷺ, he put in many he instituted many avenues in which someone could be free, could free themselves from slavery. Not only did the early Muslims as well, en masse, free large numbers of slaves. For example, see what I'm saying? Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, many of the Sahaba freed so many slaves. Henceforth, at the time of the initial dispensation of Islam and revelation, Islam was seen as, it had a liberation aspect to it, and hence many people, especially during the time of the early generations, they became Muslim because of that freedom that was intrinsic within it. So slavery was already present in the world anyway. Moreover, there are many avenues in which someone could free themselves from slavery as well. You see what I'm saying? And these things as well, which we're talking, they were not present or found in any sort of system whatsoever before. We don't find anything in Christianity to that extent where there's guidelines in which to, and contracts, like you see what I'm saying, in order wherein a slave could free themselves from slavery. And I think that the slavery in that time, how it initially, yeah, it was more like an indentured servitude relationship. It wasn't the slavery which was witnessed in the transatlantic experience. Generally, it wasn't that kind of experience. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to get to that because there were instances wherein it was actually even in Islamic history. There are some negative examples, but in how Islam cooperated in the first few hundred years of Islam, the first few generations, definitely Islam it wasn't, first of all, slavery wasn't to do with race as well, because and this is mentioned by many historians, how we find that many Arabs, but they who were mushrikeen, they were enslaved, but they Arabs, so it wasn't based upon race.
Yeah.
So the mushrikeen fighting against the Muslims, those Arabs were enslaved and taken as captives. And slave in that time is actually a captive. That's another crucial thing as well. The only way in which Islam sanctions someone to be in such an indentured situation is via captivity, via legitimate a legitimate battle. You see what I'm saying? Any other avenue is not permissible. Islam, which even in Islamic history, many instances of slavery were not that which was sanctioned by Islam. They were usually via kidnapping free people. And listen, itself was haram. The Prophet said it was one of the person on Yom Qiyamah who's going to be doomed as a man ba'a hurran, the person who sold a free person into slavery. It's haram. We have a text from the Prophet ﷺ. But that's what most of the slavery, and even in Islamic history, that's what we find happened. Let me go to another city. Me and a group of lads, see whoever we want, and capture them and kidnap them and take them as a slave. Totally impermissible. In that, you see what I'm saying? But this is what happened in large aspects in even in Islamic history, which I can get to. But so slavery was something which was existent. The Muslims interacted with it, just as other people interacted with it. In West Africa, it's big as well. I'm originally Ashanti. The Ashanti, they used to go to war against other tribes. When they used to catch the people in war, they would capture them and put them, and sell them into slavery. So this was something which is manifest all over. So it's not exclusive. To say exclusive to Islam is false, because if you're going to say that, then you also have to say, which they don't say, especially the Afrocentrics, they don't like to say, yeah, okay, the Muslims, they enslaved some black people, yeah, but they also enslaved Arabs, and they enslaved white people as well. You know what I mean? So it was all, there was equal opportunity employers in that regard.
But do we know what the balance is, Abdul Haq, in terms of the ratio of how many, because in the black community, especially where I'm from, it's a big thing. They see it as it was a big thing, and I think it's unheard of when you mention that they were other nationalities that were also enslaved by the Arabs at that time. As far as they're concerned, it was a bigger trade than the transatlantic trade, slave trade.
But in the initial Islam, it wasn't based upon race, Jamaal. This is what I'm saying. Slavery in the initial time of Islam wasn't based upon race. There's also an issue to do with the positionality of Africa. During the early Islam, remember Africa, East Africa, Ethiopia, was a powerful state which actually dominated parts of Arabia. There's the story of Abraha, mentioned in Surah Al-Fil, Ashab al-Fil, that's mentioned in Alam Tara Kayfa Fa'ala Rabbuka bi Ashab al-Fil.
Yeah.
That was who the Ashab al-Fil? That's related to Abraha, who's the Ethiopian ruler who tried to colonize southern Arabia. Hence the positionality at that time. Africa wasn't like a lowly, you see what I'm saying? A lowly sort of place in that context. If you see what I'm saying, you could say after, and some historians have actually mentioned this, that after that time when the Ethiopians lost the power and lost that kind of regional authority they had, that then impacted perceptions of Ethiopia among the Arabs as well at that time. That's also mentioned by some historians. And evidence for that further is that the Prophet he advised the Sahaba to migrate to where?
Ethiopia.
Ethiopia. Because there was why? Why? Because there was a just ruler who doesn't oppress anyone. Hence, they see the positionality, and that's again something which the Afrocentrics gloss over that fact. That Africa actually supported, maintained, and gave safe haven to the first Muslims. And if the first Muslims had a problem with Africa and they had a problem with black people, they're going to go there. They're going to find safe haven there. Was the Prophet ﷺ going to exhort the Sahaba radiallahu anhum to go there and seek safe haven there? That's another aspect. Then as well, we have the early Muslims. Good. There's a nice story which is mentioned. It's mentioned in some of the historical books, like Ibn Abdul Hakam in his book, The Conquest of Egypt, which is like the earliest historical account of the conquest of Egypt. And he mentions in there, Ibn Abdul Hakam, he mentions a narration. Allah alam if it's authentic, but it's mentioned in the earliest historical sources and does seem to have some supporting evidence to it. He said that when the first Muslims they went to Egypt, they conquered Egypt. This is a good point here, brothers, because this whole issue of Egypt is something which is pivotal, especially some of the Afrocentrics. They frame that Egypt was a black Kemet state, which was ransacked by Arabs. This is how they the simplistic way that they frame it. The Arabs came in, ransacked the place, removed the black ruling pharaohs who were there, and then they instituted Islam. This is key because I've actually read this. Some of the Afrocentric writers, like Molefi Asante, he even mentions this. He says that in West Africa they have cultural aspects which seem to be linked to ancient Egypt, and it's as if they fled, like these ancient Egyptian priests fled from the Arab invasions. It's complete nonsense historically. But when the Muslims went into Egypt, who was ruling Egypt at the time? Was it black Africans from the Kemet civilizations ruling Egypt? It was white European, Byzantine Romans were running Egypt at the time. Even in the Hadith, Muqawqis, who's mentioned as being the ruler of Egypt, and I mentioned this in the book. Muqawqis is mentioned as being the ruler of Egypt at the time. Muqawqis, some of the historians say Muqawqis comes from the Greek name Pekaukas or Pekaukasos. What does Pekaukasos mean? It means Caucasian. So the people who ruled Egypt. So it's a complete misunderstanding of like the chronology of the rulers of Egypt. It wasn't black African Kemets from the Nile Valley who were ruling Egypt at the time when the Muslims went in. It was Byzantine Romans who were ruling Egypt, and prior to them was Greek Ptolemies were ruling Egypt. Anyway, when the Muslims first went into Egypt, there's a narration which mentioned that Muqawqis, that Abdullah ibn Amr al-As, he sent a delegation which was led by Ubadah ibn as-Samit, radiallahu anhu. He was one of the Sahaba. He's Arab. He was dark black. It's mentioned in the narration. Said he's actually black. He's Arab, but he's black. It's mentioned in the sources. So when Ubadah ibn as-Samit and the Sahaba went forth to see Muqawqis, the leader of Egypt, what does the narration say? The narration says Muqawqis said, "Get that black man away from me." The Sahaba said, "Yes, he's black, but he's preceded us. He's of the best of us," and so forth. And then the conversation continues between Ubadah ibn as-Samit and the leader of Egypt, Muqawqis. And then at the end of the conversation, it's mentioned. So this is mentioned in Ibn Abdul Hakam. It's historical text from the 9th century. He says that Ubadah ibn as-Samit said, "As for your fear of me, then I have over 1,000 men waiting outside who are blacker and more ferocious than me." So this shows that who was the one bringing the blackness to Egypt? Was it the Egyptians already there? It was the Muslims who were bringing the respect for the blackness, and it was the Muslims who were emphasizing the meritocracy, and it was the Muslims who were bringing the justice, and it was the Muslims who were bringing this, trying to move away from this emphasis on colorism, which was already established in Egypt, and the Muslims came back to emphasize and bring it back. So this is an interesting story again, which again dumbfounds some of those pro-black Afrocentric pseudo historians. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. I think there's a number of points there which I've just picked up on. Before I go to the comments, I'm just going to reiterate and just touch upon them a bit more. The very fact that you've said that that the first migration of the Prophet ﷺ, and this was when the Muslims were small in number and they were being oppressed so oppressed that they were forced out of their land, essentially, that the first migration that was led by Jafar ibn Abi Talib, when the Prophet ﷺ sent those Muslims, he sent them to Abyssinia because that was, again, it's the geographical location, but it's also the protection of the just king that was there. And it was, you know, the first place after Arabia that Islam essentially went to was the African continent, right? And then you've got, you know, you talked about a couple of things there about, you know, the fact that it wasn't based upon ethnicity. I think this is the key point here that distinguishes European slavery from the slavery of the Arabs or whoever it was at the Muslims at that time. Was it wasn't specifically based upon color of skin and ethnicity, or the idea that one group of people, because of their biological features and color, are inferior to another. It was war. You know, in a wartime situation, it was the norm to take slaves, and like you mentioned, it was more the case of indentured laborers, I suppose. But you know, and the interesting point is when I spoke to one of the scholars about this, they made a point about this, that it's actually when the Muslims leave the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, then they will fall into oppressive situations. So some of the Arabs who may have, you know, enslaved Africans because of that superiority complex, or because they didn't see them as, you know, whatever that the reasons were, and they treated them very badly, wasn't because of Islam, but rather was the opposite, because they left the teachings of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, hence why they treated people in that particular way. And I think that's the interesting point to highlight here. From an Islamic viewpoint, we've got to distinguish between what Islam, the religion, teaches, and the foundations of the religion are, which is based upon justice, as we know, through many, many verses of the Quran, and to the difference between what Islam teaches and what Muslims may or may not do. I think we've got to make the different distinction there. That's the first thing. So it's not actually based upon the religion why certain Muslims behave in certain ways, but it's because of those individuals. And they can, as we talked about yesterday with Ustad Khalid Bari yesterday, he was mentioning that, you know, Muslims are human beings, and they're motivated by different things. So they can do good and they can do bad, just like anybody else. But to try and say it's from the religion is actually a very inaccurate statement to make. Now, let me just go through some of the comments before I come back to Abdul Haq and continue this discussion. We've got From the Woods, who gives salams. Is IDC in London? Nope, it's in Newcastle. Can I visit one day? Yep, you're more than welcome to come anytime. Brother Isam shares a verse of the Quran, but if they turn away, your duty is only to convey the message, and Allah is seeing of His servants. I think that's in reference to what we were talking about earlier, about forcing conversions upon people. Our dear brother Abdul Haq Baker, he makes a couple of good comments actually. This history needs to become more mainstream, referencing Abdul Haq's expertise, because there's a general ignorance among the wider South Asian and Arab Muslim communities. Absolutely, 100%. And then he says, another comment, the absence of these historical accounts are contributory factors for the racism prevalent among the wider Muslim community. Again, yeah, absolutely. I think ignorance is one of the main sources and factors for racism, and regardless of who it's from. So absolutely, I think this book, I really, really highly recommend everybody to get a copy of this book and read it and study it and understand the perspective of what Islam actually teaches, the historical inaccuracies and misinformation that's peddled against Islam and Muslims, to try and, you know, push a certain narrative that other ethnicities are more superior than the African nations and people from those countries. So yeah, 100%. That's from both sides, from non-Muslims and from Muslims. You will hear this and you will see this. So I think this is an important message to come to. Now, come back to the point, Abdul Haq. There's a couple of things that I think we should also talk about, apart from Arab slavery, European slavery. Also, there's even modern day slavery in Libya. Apparently, that there is after the fall of Gaddafi, Africans were being enslaved in Libya in the modern age, right? Do you know anything about this? Have you heard about this as well?
Bismillah. Yeah. So, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, the Libyan situation. Libya's in a state of civil war and chaos. Anyway, there are different groups and militias in Libya, different factions. It's a fitna, fighting and killing each other. They're all Muslims, fighting and killing each other. So Libya's in a state of chaos anyway, generally. Due to that, Libya was a main place on the map for human smuggling, human trafficking. Many people from East Africa, West Africa, even Afghanistan and Pakistan and India ended up in Libya so that they could cross from Libya into Italy and then make their way into Europe. So Libya has always been one of the main places, even prior to the Civil War, which is on the route for illegal immigration and human trafficking. With regards to the issue of Africans being enslaved, it wasn't some of the footage which I've seen. There's no doubt that there are some issues in Libya. I wouldn't say it's to do with race in Libya, though. I mentioned this in my book. Why do I say that? Because as I mentioned in the book, there were Moroccans, illegal immigrants as well, who were also human trafficked, and then they pleaded for the Moroccan government to come and help them because they said that they were being enslaved. So it shows that it wasn't based upon race. They also said, Moroccans also said that they were being sold in markets and so forth. So this emphasized wasn't based upon race. Secondly, one of the main tribes in Libya, who are called the Tubu tribe, I mentioned them in the book. They're a tribe. They're from the southeastern part of Libya. They're largely black tribe, Tubu tribe. They were against Gaddafi as well. So they cooperated with those other militias and other groups who were against Gaddafi. But they were also pivotal in, so they used to gain a lot of money via trafficking people. So they were pivotal in the trafficking, in the human trafficking of people as well. You see what I'm saying? The Tubu tribe. Hence, it shows that it's not based upon race in that sense. There might have seen some footage of some ignoramuses saying some racist stuff and that, but that doesn't mean that generally this is what's going on there. Based upon the research, which I also mentioned, it definitely wasn't based upon race. As I mentioned, there were other nationalities who I think Morocco actually sent an actually airlifted out a whole load of Moroccans and also other West Africans out of Libya on that basis, that they said that they were also being trafficked and stuff. I think it was more human trafficking as opposed to slavery. You see what I'm saying? I don't think that there was like slavery like that. There are places where that is slavery, as it's traditionally understood, is taking place in the Muslim world, which we can get to, but that wasn't one of them. Yeah, see what I'm saying? That wasn't one of them.
In the modern Muslim world,
and also yeah, which we can get to.
It's still taking
later.
place.
But Libya wasn't really a case of it. It was maybe just some ignorant militias doing some silly stuff and saying stupid things, as opposed to it being based upon like enslavement of black people. Because as I said, they were also doing that to people who were not black as well.
Right. Okay. There's another comment coming from Abdul Haq again. A good biographical account of white slavery under the Mullah of Morocco is a book called White Gold by an Englishman who was captured off the coast of England and enslaved as a young man. That's interesting because even with the Ottomans, there's a case that they say that the Ottomans, that during their conquests and their incursions, they would also, and I think you touched upon it earlier, would take prisoners of war, I guess, as slaves, but it wasn't specifically about color. It was the rules of engagement at the time. They would go and they would enslave people, whoever it was. So that's what you're talking about, the Circassians, who were white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and others like that across Europe as well, apparently.
Yeah, there's a further book by Robert C. Davis called Christian Slaves, Muslim Masters, which is a very good book. It's an excellent historical book. It talks about the issue of Barbary, the Barbary slave coast, the Barbary coast, basically, which is essentially North Africa, Algeria, main at the time. And it was piracy, essentially. So the North Africans at the time, they were engaged in piracy. So after the time of 1492, say 15th and 16th century, there's a lot of piracy, raids. There's a lot of raids. So some of the North Africans would sail. I think there's even accounts where they would sail to Ireland, dock in an island, raid the place, take slaves, and then return. So this happened a lot, this frequently. It's basically essentially piracy. It's well known in history, the Barbary Coast, and focusing upon North Africa's piracy. These people were kind of they were corsairs, and in some cases they were known as renegades. And in fact, interesting, Abu Tayyib, some of these who were known as renegades in England, they were people who converted to Islam. So there's a lot of people who in the 15th and 16th century converted to Islam. Not from England, but also from Spain and Portugal, and then they went to the Barbary Coast, and then they kind of became Muslim, and they were also involved in this like piracy. Even like there's a notion that the whole notion of Jack Sparrow was actually based on he was a case in point. He was someone who was
Pirates of the Caribbean, the franchise, franchise.
He was actually someone.
Is it true that he became Muslim and he was part of that piracy?
It's based upon someone. Yeah, it's based upon someone who became Muslim and was one of these so-called renegades, English renegades.
Right. Okay, that's interesting.
Muslim. So that was slave raiding. It wasn't based upon the religion. It was a sort of tit for tat raiding, because it was the Christians would do that from Europe as well. Because it's an interesting point, because I had a discussion which is on YouTube with a professor, Dr. Anthony McCrory, on this issue. And he was saying that there should be reparations to Europe for the Muslim slave raiding. And that's difficult. I mean, that's difficult to say, the reparations, because Allah says tilka al-umam qad khalat laha ma kasabat wa lakum ma kasabtum. You see what I'm saying? Those people those nations have passed. And to them is what they earned, and until you is what you earn. You see what I'm saying? So, and also it's la yukallifu nafsan. Allah says, you see what I'm saying? It's difficult. No one should bear the sins of what another person has bore. You see what I'm saying? But what previous generations have done, we shouldn't necessarily bear the responsibility of that. That's also a principle in Islam. That's what Allah says in the Quran.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. So
although
for African Americans, and there's a call for reparations in the modern world now, in modern times, for people who were enslaved or colonized. And is there a claim for that then, Islamically? Is that something which we don't hold? We don't accept then?
Yeah, I mean, Allah says, "La taziru waziratun wizra ukhra." Yeah, no one should bear the burdens of what someone else has bore. Yeah. So, we can't sort of claim that it's nothing to do with us. We can't claim any responsibility for it. We were not involved in it. We can, however, like if there was anything against Islam which took place, we could say yes, that was against Islam. That wasn't correct, and we condemn it. You see what I'm saying? Condemn the action for going against the Quran and the Sunnah. Anything which was against the Quran and the Sunnah, what the Prophet ﷺ taught. You see what I'm saying? What was against what Allah mentioned in His book, against what the Prophet ﷺ taught, and what's against the way of the early Muslims, we can condemn it. We can condemn those actions. We have no part in them. And the people involved, anyone involved in such actions, yes, they have to apologize and they have to make amends. But for us to do that for other past nations, it's difficult for us to do. We can't do that now. We can say that the thing was wrong, but we can't bear the full burden of it. And it's interesting because it's actually Nick Griffin and the BNP. They were one of the first people who, and I mentioned this to Anthony McCrory in my discussion with him in 2007. I said I first heard of this, like seeking reparations from, because some of the Christians, they say, Christian evangelists in the West, they say Muslims should give us reparations for that. You see what I'm saying? And so what I said is that, yeah, this notion, I actually heard it first from Nick Griffin from the BNP, that he was saying that Muslims should pay reparations
Really? What he
for
said.
for slave raiding against Ireland
Right.
and England.
Okay.
Stuff like that. You see what I'm
That's
saying?
interesting. But you know, okay, let's switch it around a little bit, yeah, because you know it's all good and well Europeans or the European states who have profited and benefited from slavery and colonialism over generations and centuries, for them to say, you know, we need reparations when they're actually benefited the most from the whole slave trade, if you like. Whereas on the flip side of it all, people who were enslaved and who were under the colonial powers lost everything. We're not just talking about lost their lives in many cases, but we're also talking about loss of wealth, loss of economy, breaking down structures, destroying civilizations, and as a result of that, many people are still haven't recovered from that, if you like. Yeah, so you know they're talking about 46 trillion or whatever it is from India alone to build the Industrial Revolution. People, when they came here to follow the wealth that was taken from their countries, you know, they still don't have a level playing field, and there's still that superiority and inferiority, the structural racism, if you like, the infrastructures that we live in. You know, we still don't have those equal rights. You know, so reparations in that regard, at the very least, shouldn't we be talking about and discussing issues around bringing about a level playing field for whether it's economically or even just basic rights, even?
I think when there's issues where there's sort of clear plundering of certain artifacts and that kind of thing, and these artifacts are held, you know, in countries wherein that's not where they're from, there definitely should be kind of, I think, discussions about that. You see what I'm saying? That's an issue. But if I just bring it back now to let's look at in Islamic history, there were some instances as well, brothers, where there was slavery, did take place, and it was and these were really negative examples. And I think for us as Muslims, it was good for us to be aware of that. Hence, I mentioned it in the book, and we have to be aware of it, admit it, and say, look, that took place, that was wrong, totally against the teachings of Islam. And there are about 5 instances in history where that took place. We've discussed one of them with the Barbary Coast.
Not necessarily what Islam teaches, so what some Muslims have participated in, in contradiction to what the religion teaches.
Yeah, definitely. We've discussed one of them with the Barbary Coast slavery. And then the other examples are, if we let's look at that. Other examples are, and I'll mention some other interesting points because you touched upon the Ottoman issue. Is like, okay, good. First issue is the whole issue of castration. This was massive over the last from about from the last 800 years, from about the 8th century, even up until the 19th century. Castration was massive in the Muslim world in terms of using slaves who had been castrated. Totally haram. So I'm saying there are some notions where the Prophet said from Ibn Abbas there's a narration, and from Ibn Umar as well there's a narration. In Abu Dawud, there's some weakness in it, but there are some other narrations which strengthen it, where the Prophet forbade castration of animals and people. And the scholars mention, Ibn Hajar Asqalani, he mentions that there's nahyan shadidan. There is a severe prohibition on castration in Islam. So I'm saying, whether that be an animal or a human. So this is what Islam says. However, what took place totally contrary to that. Let's look at this. Abu Tayeb in the Ottoman world. They used a lot of slaves who had been castrated, largely from East Africa. What was interesting, there's a little loophole which the Ottomans utilized though.
Okay.
Because it was haram, castration was haram. They acquired. So we could say that at least the Ottomans never really. The Ottomans didn't really. They didn't really do it. They never did it themselves. The act, but they sort of benefited and reaped the rewards, as it were, of a castration operation on an individual who was a slave. These are castration operations. This is something as well which some of the non-Muslims are not aware of. I've mentioned this in the book because it's quite a niche thing which I sort of came across, and I mentioned it in the book. So these castration operations during that time, they took Christians did them in Coptic Christians in Egypt at monasteries did these castrations.
Wow.
And in fact, some of these monasteries would gain their revenue by performing these operations and then selling the boys who went through this castration onto slave markets within the Ottoman realm. You see what I'm saying? So they were conducted by Christians. Appalling operations, really disgusting, unhumane, and totally against the religion. The Ottomans later they did issue what's called a firman, which is like an edict in some of their territories, outlawing this and not to participate. But this was largely ignored by the ignorant people. You see what I'm saying? So that's important to say as well, that you do find that this whole notion of eunuchs. You see what I'm saying? So eunuch, somebody who's had his penis and testicles chopped off. In some cases, it was just the testicles removed for some of the slaves who were from Europe. But for the people from East Africa, it was the full-scale penis and testicles chopped off. Completely barbaric, nothing to do with Islam, totally against Islam. And as I mentioned, the scholars were against. Yeah. See, we're discussing about this now, but this was something which was commonplace, like even about 250 years ago. You see what I'm saying? That this whole notion of castration is massive in the Muslim world. Some of it is, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's a problem. That's a massive problem. But it took place. That so that's an instance of a really negative which had happened. Another example was there was in the 9th century in Basra there was a slave rebellion which is well known, which was called the Zanj slave rebellion. It's well known. So I mean the rebellion itself, some people say it wasn't necessarily to do with like liberation or emancipation from slavery, but there was other machinations involved in it, which I mentioned in the book. But that took place. That was and after that happened, that sort of brought an end to mass plantation slavery in the Middle East due to that incident which took place. Then there was issues of the Omani Empire, the Omani state, which is interesting. And when we look at the history, especially how it impacted East Africa, the Omanis, who are Ibadi Kharijis in their belief in Aqidah, they was entrenched. Their economy was entrenched in slavery. That's why you find in Oman now they have a massive black community. Where are they from? Largely their origin is from East Africa. Zanzibar. Zanzibar was the capital actually of the Omani state at one point.
And that's even influenced their clothing as well. If you look at the clothing, it's very similar to African sort of dress as well. Is that one of the reasons why?
That's an interesting point you said. It's because it's probably largely not African at all. It probably stems from Oman actually. And it influenced all Swahili culture and influenced the East African culture. But yeah, that slavery took place. That's interesting. That was quite barbaric, brutal as well. Interestingly, for us to note is that when the Omani slave history, I could find little in terms of any of their any Omani scholars or anything like speaking out against it. Couldn't find any rulings. Couldn't find any anything at all. And I think that could be. I'm not sure if it's due to the fact that they have their own heterodox understanding of Islam, which is they're a branch of the Khawarij in Oman. So I'm not sure if that is why we don't find any condemnation really from any scholars. But I'll get to that as well later because it's an important point in this issue. So that's important. Also in East Africa, we had people like Tipu Tip, who was a Swahili slave raider who went into certain parts of the East African hinterland. Again, just kidnapped people and sold them into slavery. Again, totally nothing to do with Islam, just to do with greed and power in economics, especially in East Africa. The economy is based upon slavery. So human movement, human trafficking, kidnapping, clothes, ivory, and all of these commodities. So that's the example as well. Another example, and if we move into West Africa, is in the 16th century, during the time of the Saadi dynasty of Morocco, under the reign of Ahmed al-Mansur, they raided and sacked the city of Timbuktu in Mali, the Songhai Empire, which was the capital of the Songhai Empire. And in that attack, which is interesting actually, a lot of dynamics involved in that because the Saadi dynasty itself, that attack was actually led by a Portuguese convert to Islam called Judah Pasha. He actually led it, and some other Portuguese converts to Islam. and they also attacked Timbuktu, enslaved the scholars, and enslaved the people, and took them back to Morocco. And there's a scholar called Ahmed Baba at Timbuktu. He wrote a book on slavery. He's got a book in the 16th century on like condemnation of slavery. You see what I'm saying? Because of how it was taking place, there's essentially enslaving free people. And Ahmed Baba, Timbuktu, he wrote a book on that at the time. He was later freed. He was of Berber origin in Timbuktu, from Timbuktu. So there are instances, brothers, where I'd say about 4 or 5 instances in history which are really sort of negative, nothing to do with Islam, but it's good for us to kind of be aware of that.
We need to know,
because we can't just like what we notice, especially brothers yourselves were not involved in dawah. Sometimes we just fall into, or some Muslims, they fall into simplistic. Oh, Islam came, freed the slaves. We have the story of this Sahabi who was a slave. People always mention the story of Bilal radiallahu anhu, but which is true. But it's like we don't want to kind of be caught off guard and be unaware of like hundreds of years of history where Islam was basically totally disregarded when it came to the issue of slavery. And why we say this why it's important is because in the history of Islam, however, and this is again key for dawah, is that whereas in Christianity and in transatlantic slavery, which we're witnessing in the Caribbean and the Americas, is that in those contexts, they tried to come with the book. They tried to come with the Bible to justify it. In South Africa, the Dutch Reformed Church tried to come with the Bible to justify, and they mentioned the story of Ham being cursed black and to be a slave. You see what I'm saying? They mentioned that they tried to come with the Bible. In the history of Islam, though, nobody tried to come with the Quran to justify it. No one came with a book to try to justify the slavery. So that's an important point as well. That we always mention dawah.
Very, very
no one
point.
came with the book to try to justify slavery. In fact, I would argue, and I do argue, is that they in fact did what they did contrary to the book. So, by putting the book to one side and then doing what they did. It's like what they said, as I was also mentioning in the book, I mentioned like there's some racist statements which were made by some historians, Arab historians in the past, like people like Ibn Khaldun and Al-Mas'udi and others. They mentioned some really erroneous statements with regards to different races in their writings. Ibn Khaldun does in his history, in his Muqaddimah, for instance, unacceptable things. But this is just Ibn Khaldun's own musings. It's not something that's not something which is from Islam. That's just that's his void view. You see what I'm saying? That's his erroneous void view, which we just throw against the wall. It's in compared to what Allah we throw that against the wall. So that's something as well to be aware of. But people try to bring that. Why I say that is people will try to bring that. I've met some people, they try to go, see, look what Ibn Khaldun says. Look what this one says. Aren't they Muslim scholars? Well, like Ibn Khaldun, rahimahullah, he wasn't like a scholar, muhaddith, scholar of hadith or aqidah. See what I'm saying? He was a historian. I mean, and even if he was a scholar of aqidah and fiqh, we still wouldn't blindly follow him anyway.
Exactly.
So I think these things are important to clarify. I think.
Yeah, I think. Jazakallah khair for that. Just on a different point, I think it's very important, like you mentioned, Saad, is that to know these things, because when you don't know them and you speak to like a non-Muslim academic or you speak to non-Muslims, and the moment you're completely ignorant of them, it also undermines what you really know about your history. Because knowing them separates Islam and it almost protects Islam, right? Even a lot with India, right? The Muslims in India. People don't know what some of these kings used to do. They used to kill like their sons and their brothers like for the throne, right? And this is a crazy practice they have, and a lot of people, they don't know about this. They don't know, like the famous Muslim kings in India, their sons would fight for the throne for them, would try to overthrow them, their brother would fight for them. Their own brothers would say stuff like, the king would ask his brother, what should I do with you if you did this to me? And he would say, cut my body up and send me to all over India, and crazy stuff like this. So it's good to be aware of it, just so you don't get caught out.
Good. The Ottomans as well. The Ottomans did that as well. Entrenched in fratricide. See what I'm saying? This one would come, kill his brother, kill his cousin, entrenched in these things. See what I'm saying? So it's important to know. There's some interesting points. Let me just say some positives as well. After mentioning those negatives, It mentions some positives, and this is even what some of the non-Muslim historians say. Some of the positives is that the Muslim scholars were, as I mentioned in, I think in one of our other sessions, the Muslim scholars were at the forefront of condemning this in their writings. In Morocco, we had scholars called I mentioned him in the book. There's a guy called Ibn Jassus. There was a guy called Al-Jarimi. He wrote a book on slavery. Ibn Jassus, also from Morocco, wrote a book on slavery. He was actually imprisoned on account of it. You see what I'm saying? Because he was against speaking about some of the injustices, was about and how it was contrary to Islam. You see what I'm saying? This is even one of my professors when I was at university was. He actually even mentioned this in his book called Islam and the Abolition of Slavery. He actually mentions how the ulama were actually always pivotal in condemning, speaking against this. You see what I'm saying? Look at Ahmed Baba Timbukti. His book is still studied to this day for what he had with regards to what he mentioned with regards to the whole topic of slavery. So that's a positive. Also, even in the Islamic world, even the examples that you mentioned within Islam, there was still remit and recourse where a person could either purchase and free themselves from slavery and rise up in the society. So there's a meritocracy. So I'm saying that didn't happen in any other civilization, as far as I'm aware. Maybe in the Chinese, you can find some examples of that, but definitely didn't happen in the Western situation. Definitely didn't, and it almost definitely didn't happen in transatlantic slavery. You couldn't have somebody in transatlantic slavery who was like enslaved in the Americas, and then he was freed, and then went on to become president or something like that. But you find things like that in Islamic history. You find that. And then even in Islamic history, there's I think the Ubaidiyah or the Fatimiyah in Egypt when they ruled in the 10th century or the 9th century. There was someone called Kafur, who was an ex-slave who then went on to become the leader of the country for a period. So you see what I'm saying? In Islam, there was a meritocracy. There was avenues for freedom. There was encouragement to freedom. There was a meritocracy, and so forth. These things were there. Also, thirdly, is the issue of, as we said, race as well. It wasn't based upon race. Muslims enslaved, especially in that epoch, enslaved anyone. There's even, as I mentioned in the book, in the rulers of Timbuktu and Songhai in West Africa, they had slaves who were Greek, Turkish, and Circassian in their court. You know what I'm saying? The Ottomans also enslaved, and this is interesting as well. And this is something which baffles many non-Muslims, and it baffles many historians, is that in Ottoman history, some of the Circassians, they actually wanted to be enslaved. They actually wanted to become slaves in the Ottoman court. Why? Because if they were, then this would give them avenues to this meritocratic society where they could, rise up in rank and, maybe go into the army, the armed forces, and become part of the military. You see what I'm saying? So there was because of this meritocracy. There's mentioned, and I mentioned this. There's a historian called Toledano. He's done a lot of research with regards to slavery in the Ottoman realm, and he mentions this as well.
Yeah. Sorry to jump in because otherwise I'm gonna get accused of not having any contribution to like whatsoever. But the thing is, I mean, it's true as you say. I mean, obviously there are other races that were enslaved in history, and we've got some beautiful comments as well from Abdul Haq as others as well. But the thing is, I mean, like, are there examples of these other nationalities being treated as bad as the African slaves in history? Is there any comparison, or is this something where we can see that?
No. I think that's a good point. Although there are accounts, and this is mentioned by Robert C. Davis in his book Christian Slaves, Muslim Masters. He mentions accounts from Europeans who were enslaved on the Barbary coast, and their slave masters were black. And they talk about these wretched Negroes beating us to death. So there's things like that. But generally, yeah, I think you're right. Generally, Africa, parts of Africa, whether that was East Africa, it was used as a resource for slaves for the Middle East, and even for the parts of the Mughal Empire. There was the East African coast was used as a resource for slavery. That's why in India and Pakistan have the Shiddi community. So I'm saying, who were the Shiddis? The Shiddis were descended from those people who were brought over from the East African coast slaves during the Mughal Empire. And also in India, You know what I'm saying? West Africa as well also uses kind of resource. They've been doing transatlantic slave. West Africa is also used as a resource for slavery. But I think it's important though and I think transatlantic slavery in the Americas and the brutal daily humiliation, daily dehumanization which took place in transatlantic slavery. That was really brutal. There's no way that can be compared, in my estimation, and this is what I discussed in my discussion with Anthony McCrory. There's nothing that could be compared with what transpired, even though there were instances of really inhumane activity in Islamic history. Nothing can compare with the transatlantic system, because that was an instituted and systematic system of dehumanization. You see what I'm saying? That in transatlantic slavery, there's what was known as the slave codes, or the black codes, which gave permission of a white man to spit in the face of a black slave, and these kind of things. You know what I'm saying? So I do think, though, going back to what you're saying, I do think that there are issues where essentially black people can have been viewed, stereotyped as being sort of slaves and lowly and that kind of thing, due to things so I think that does need to be addressed as well. You see what I'm saying? Why do you think in parts of the Middle East they still refer to black people as abd? There's just a black person, abd, a slave. This is terrible. This is horrific kind of sort of phraseology which is being used by these ignoramuses over there in the Gulf who say these things. But we find this, and I think it needs people to be self-reflective, actually. Really self-reflective. We have to challenge these things. I remember I heard someone from the Gulf refer to a black person as that. I problematized that and I questioned him. He was very embarrassed. So very, very embarrassed.
Yeah.
And he tried to sort of backtrack and stuff. And so I thought, let's explore this. What you're actually using, what you actually refer to that person. Let's explore that. And as I mentioned, it's due to your context, where maybe in your context, in your history, that's your relationship with black people. But I mean, it's totally unacceptable for you to sort of be using that.
Yeah.
I think people have to challenge it properly, challenge it with knowledge, because you know what I'm saying. You find a lot of this sort of anti-black sentiment. Abu Tayb's talked about colorism. You find that in part of the Arab world. You know, it really has to be challenged, but it has to be done with ilm and hikmah.
Yeah.
So perhaps a little chance then. See, Abdul Haq, one of the comments he made, he's obviously saying good points, Abu Tayyib. Jazakallah khair. One way to redress this, to provide institutional stipends like free higher education, subsidized homes, financial allowances beyond the current state benefits. These should be generational until or unless those groups have been elevated beyond inherited poverty. Now, obviously, as it was mentioned earlier on, you know, maybe it's not something which those that came later should have to deal with, but obviously it's an easy thing to do, isn't it? Especially if you're a country that have benefited from, you know, the sweats of slaves historically. That it's an easy thing to do, especially if you have that wealth that you could set up these sort of institutions. You know, they do charity all the time. Doing charity is an easy thing. So why not set something up like this? And even if you don't want to call it reparations, you can call it whatever you want. But, you know, it's probably time we started to see things like this happening, especially because it's just like money is nothing to some of these people and who can afford these things.
Okay, there's
the problem with that is, Jamaal, though, I think it's an issue of, you know, not wanting to. I mean, charity. People will give charity to many different causes, many things.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't affect them and their privilege and their standing and position, right? I think this is why it's a good point, but I really highly doubt it's going to happen anytime soon.
Same here.
Well, people don't. The people who are responsible for this current situation and maintaining this framework of institutional racism and benefiting from that, it's going to be very difficult for somebody to turn around and say, let me give up some of my privilege so that I can be on an equal standing to somebody else whom I probably look down on anyway, right? So I think the people who are in power, I don't know, maybe I'm just being a bit pessimistic here, I don't know, but Allahu Alam, but I really don't. It's a good idea, it's a good perspective, but I think that the difficulty is going to be that the powers that be, so to speak, aren't going to allow themselves. They'll make 101 excuses. Oh yeah, we're in deficit. We're going through an economic downturn. Blah blah blah. This, that, and the other. And they'll make so many different reasons. Yet what you'll find is year upon year, the British people are probably some of the most charitable people when it comes to. I mean, just look at Red Nose Day and look at Comic Relief and how many millions and billions are raised in charity and stuff like that. So I don't know. I think it's a bit wishful thinking if we think that other people are going to do that when they're in the positions that they're at. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's going to be a bit difficult to.
Can I say something quickly on that?
Whole infrastructure that we have, which is designed to benefit the minority elite, and then keep the rest of us at bay, so to speak. So I think it'll be. I don't know. That's just my.
Can I make a point on that?
Please.
Go for it.
Yeah, I agree with Tayeb. That I don't. The reality of that happening, I don't think that's going to happen per se. The most we can get is probably some kind of recognition. I don't think you can get an apology or anything like that. That's not happening. I think Tony Blair, he said something like slavery was a sorrowful act, without sort of stop short of sort of apologize. Said it was a sorrowful act. But importantly, though, this is something which I think people now, we shouldn't, I think, rely on waiting for handouts or reparations. We have to just move on, but be able to challenge it. Be proactive. You know what I'm saying? Be proactive. Use wisdom and challenge things as they come, and be aware of these things and always mention it. I think it's good to note it in history, as opposed to sort of waiting with bowl in hand for them to give us something, to give some sort of reparation. I don't think that's happening. I don't think that should be the way. I think we should carry on persevere as well. Furthermore, we have to again as well assume some responsibility as well. There was the Ghanaian president. He had a good dialogue, which maybe some of you have seen with the French president Macron.
Yeah, beautiful.
When he went to Ghana, and he said even like in Ghana, and I'm Ghanaian, so I can speak on it. Is that he said, but you also have to take responsibility. He said Ghana has to take responsibility. Why is the GDP? I think it said something like the GDP. Why did South Korea, which started off, which assumed independence after Ghana, and was also in a poorer state than Ghana in the 1950s? Why is it now totally taken over Ghana? So he said that there's issues of, you know what I'm saying? People have to also take responsibility. There's mismanagement, greed, sort of these rapacious leaders, and like this cabal of people who just squander the resources of a country for themselves. You see what I'm saying? All of these things also have to be taken into consideration as well. You see what I'm saying? Unfortunately, this is what some of our people, or you know what I'm saying? This is what some of our people's by extension, have been involved in, and they have to take responsibility for that. You see what I'm saying? We can't after all that them kind of things and then wait and for someone else, because unfortunately, do you know what I mean, from my own hands. You see what I'm saying? ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. You know what I'm saying? That corruption has appeared on the land and sea due to what the people's own hands have earned. You see what I'm saying? So kind of have to also assume some responsibility for some of those things as well, I think. But I think there should be definitely more recognition about the role, the blood, sweat and tears of what's happened. You know what I'm saying? Of the past. Definitely should be more recognition of it. I don't think that is fully, to be honest. Especially like
there's not
as well, when you say that it was built upon on this.
It was built upon this. This is the point. And I think in response to Abdul Haq's comment there, I think one thing that we certainly have to do, and there's some things that we can do to address this issue as well, this situation, because I don't think we should be pacifist in all of this either. I don't think we should just say, oh yeah, what's done's done, and then accept the situation that we find ourselves in. There's a number of things that we can do. Number one, and this is something that I've mentioned in other shows as well, inform yourself. Learn your history, learn your culture, learn your background, learn your understanding, the good, bad, and the ugly, right? Understand the accuracies of what's actually happened. Number two, raise awareness. Bring about having these types of shows that we're doing now with the likes of Abdul Haq, Kufi, and some of the other brothers like Dr. Steph, who we've had on. raise awareness so that we can understand what our position should be in accordance to the Quran and the Sunnah. Like what Khalid said yesterday. Beautiful points he made. He said these are the things that we should be understanding and sticking to, because our deen has the solution to every situation and problem. If we look at the principles of it. Number 3, seek justice and look for a level playing field. When it comes to anything economical, education, housing, whatever it might be, we need to still work towards building that, and challenging things like, for example, this concept of white flight. When Muslims or ethnic minorities in general, when they move into a white area, right, which is an affluent area, then you start seeing all the for sale signboards coming up, right, and then the people are there and moving out. Challenging these type of things and other aspects of what we're seeing. And most importantly, I would say, take ownership of our wealth, because we underestimate the wealth that Muslims that have and hold as a community, as a wider community, as an ummah, even in Britain alone. I mean, if we spend, listen to this, yeah, we normally spend every year £100 million just in Ramadan alone in giving charity. £100 million is not a small amount of money for only less than 5% of the population. That's a lot of money. That means that there is wealth in our communities, right? And keeping that wealth and building upon that wealth and investing that wealth so that we can become socially, economically, and politically more, what's the word I'm looking for? Prosperous, right? So, there's a whole thing about the Muslim pound. The halal meat industry alone is worth millions, right? The Muslim pound, just in Britain alone, the Muslim pound is worth a lot. So taking ownership of that, being able to, work with the money that we have within ourselves to uplift our communities. I think that's one thing that we need to take ownership ourselves. I mean, yes, we should hold other people to account external to our communities, but we should also equally hold ourselves to account and then take ownership of that and build upon that. That's my views anyway. That's how I think we should be moving forward from this.
I wish you did, man.
As well, sometimes I think we can fall into that defeatist mindset a little bit, and we need to go beyond that somewhat. Sorry, so did you say something?
No, I said, yeah. I mean, we really need to move in that direction. I mean, as someone who does fundraisers for a lot of different charities, I see like some of the best Islamic charities, right, that have some of the best projects nobody donates, right? And obviously you guys experience this as well. Dawah, okay, yeah, Dawah, I'd rather give to humanitarian. A Muslim like news agency, like 5 Pillars, defending the ummah. Uncles getting stabbed and them covering it. Sisters, that 12-year-old girl Shukri Abdi, being bullied and then drowning, right? And then them releasing all these articles, and then 5 Pillars goes, corrects it, and everyone changes their story, right? No one cares. No one wants to donate to that. No one's interested. And it's one of these Cage, all these amazing organizations in the UK, they struggle because the mindset, like you said, bro, it's not there yet. When it can almost be more rewardable to do those stuff, to walk with your brother in a time of need. The Prophet said he'd rather do that than itikaf in the masjid, right? But yeah, you're right, bro. If we moved in that direction, so much more could happen, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And so, therefore, I have a question for Abdul Haq regarding that. Obviously, AT, you're talking about the Muslim community and how much wealth is owned within the community. And we do tend to see more of a coming together in the Muslim community in terms of supporting each other. We don't see this in the Black community. We don't see this at all, and I'd like to know what your take is on that. Why is it that over the last few decades, when people have been trying to encourage the Black community to support each other, for example, there's a small business, and help them out, shop there and stuff like this, and help them to grow, and then why are we not seeing this? And what's your take on this? What do you think? Why do you think this is?
I've got. I'm not sure though. Jamaal, cousin. I was living in Brixton for many years.
Yeah.
And I can't say that was the case there. You see what I'm saying? So for the context I was living, I did see support for local black businesses, and I saw those local black businesses thrive. And I also saw businesses within many of the young brothers, like now in South London, who have done business and they've done really well. So I'm seeing people who are in jail come out, you know what I mean, get back on their deen, and then at the same time have a work ethic, a strong work ethic, and they've done really well. And Allah's blessed their businesses. They've done things like, whether that's been in construction, whether that's been in painting and decorating, whether that's been in fashion, clothing, retail. There's a real strong work ethic. I've seen it a lot in South.
But how many of them have, for
London,
example, a
many of the younger
conglomerate where
brothers as well.
yeah, sorry, how many of them have a conglomerate where they're working together to help, for example, to send people to university?
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
You have that, yeah, mashallah.
I've seen it yeah, I've seen it on a small scale. I haven't seen it on a big scale, but I've seen it. I have to be honest. I've seen it. You know what I'm saying? There is that. It could be much better.
Could be much better, absolutely. We need
much better, but I have seen that. I've definitely seen that in sort of the Brixton area over the years, and that's, I think, to their brothers' credit. I have seen that, like a strong work ethic has been established there. I'm not sure why it's been more there as well, but I've seen I think the things to do with the area, the nature of the area, the dynamics and things what have happened in history and over the years. There is that kind of emphasis on sort of being independent and going out and sort of earning your risk. And I think that Islam also supports that as well. And the importance of doing for self, having your own business, being independent. I think it's the independence as well. So I do have seen that over the years. I have seen a good work ethic, like a really commendable work ethic I've seen in Brixton, and I've also seen it with the young brothers. And I think I would say why that is because some of the young brothers who possibly were in jail and were on sort of also on the road as well involving nefarious activities. What they did is that they had transferable skills, which they used. So they used their hustling, they used their business acumen, and they used their enterprise, and they used that this time, however, for that which was legal. That's for one was legal, and that which was khair in it, and that's why I think they've done well. They've used that business acumen and that energy to do something good. So
Okay, we'll come.
I have seen it, but I do think that could be better.
Yeah, we'll come to the end of the show, guys. We're just gonna read the last few comments and then we'll wrap it up there, inshallah.
I will tell you, I know you're looking at the timing, but bro, I have to ask one question, man. Let me ask Abdul Haq. Ustad, I experienced something very strange in one country. Alhamdulillah, I've had the opportunity to travel to a lot of countries for dawah and work, but something very strange I experienced was South Africa. I went there and I was just in the airport, but you experience reverse racism. Yeah, you see them like literally in front of you if you're white or light skinned. Like they're much more rooted to you. They don't want to answer you. They move you to the side. And I was looking at the brothers and I was asking one of the brothers who's white South African. And he was like, yeah, this is a phenomenon. Hey, do you know why that is? Maybe it was just a bad experience in the airport, or is that like a known thing that's happening in South Africa?
Well, obviously I've never been to South Africa, so it'd be difficult for me to comment. The only thing I could say is when I was at university, I did write an essay on the. I think I got first class for the essay. I wrote an essay on the account for the demise of the apartheid state. I think why that is what you experience. I mean, I'm not sure the dynamics. But for all of the people, the staff who did that to you, were they all black Africans?
Yeah. It was like you could see it.
Yeah. So there's probably historical dimensions because remember they South Africa went through brutal apartheid system. You see what I'm saying? Systematically, the black Africans were kept to the bottom, while everyone else, was reaping the again on the backs of the labor of the majority of the black South African majority. The country was established, but they didn't reap anything. In fact, they were at the bottom of the scale. You know what I'm saying? They were at the bottom. They were kept apart. Remember, apartheid was brutal. If you know about the history of it. So I'm saying. They said it was separate development, but it's essentially just like remember they wasn't even allowed to have any partake in society at all. nothing, no rights or hardly at all. So I think it's to do with that context. You see what I'm saying? I think it's good that you sort of you reflected upon it, but I think it's to do with that context, Akhi, to do with like how brutal the apartheid was. Everyone was kind of at the top. You had you had the whites at the top, Then you had then I think they had what they class as, and I worked with some South African brothers before in Saudi, so it would come through. Even some of their some racist things would also come through. And one brother said to me, he said to me, he said, I think what is due to because we were never allowed to mix. So this brother at the time, he was good, he was about 15 years older than me. So now he's probably about in his early 60s or something. But I remember he was saying we weren't allowed to mix at all. It was total segregation. So within such a context, obviously it's going to lead to hardening of sentiments. You see what I'm saying? And I think that's probably what's happened there. You see what I'm saying? That's why they don't want a repeat of that. Yeah, there's a strong like, South thing. So, but it's good to be reflective of it and to understand maybe the context of it as well. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, a couple of comments here from Greg Oates. He says, "What is the Islamic basis for taking wealth by force from one group and giving it to another?" He also mentions responsibility equals responsibility. So that's quite clever. But yeah, so quickly, just answer that one, Abdul Haq, if you can. What is the Islamic basis for taking wealth by force from one group and giving it to another? I think it was based upon that conversation that we had earlier about, the whole institutional racism and infrastructures and, forced wealth and forced poverty. So what's your quick take on that?
Yeah, from my understand, Allahu Alam, to take someone's wealth unjustly by force, that's something which is haram. The Prophet did mention in some hadith that would happen, that there were people would come and would do that. So I'm saying that the rulers would come and do that. وَإِن ضَرَبَ ظَهْرَكَ وَأَخَذَ مَالَكَ تَسْمَعُ وَتُطِيعُ. He said if the rulers do that, we should still obey them so as not to bring about a greater harm by trying to fight against the rulers. We shouldn't fight against the rulers. Even if they beat our backs and take our wealth, we shouldn't do that. So, but whether that's so, the Prophet said that would happen, but the Prophet obviously wasn't condoning that. But so to do that is unjust, and if someone can defend that whoever the Prophet said, whoever dies while defending his wealth and his honor and his family is a shaheed. So I'm saying that talks about the honorable. But so Allah knows best. That's from what I know, that taking wealth by force, and I understand by that unjustly, is something which is haram. Anyway, it could happen, as it has happened in the past. But the basis of it, there is, I understand there is no Islamic basis to do that unjust in the unjust way.
That sums it up quite nicely, actually. What about there's a couple of comments by Tariq. Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum salam, Tariq. I love you all for the sake of Allah. Likewise, my brother, may Allah accept your fasting and your nightly prayers and fulfill your du'as. And the comment by One Deen TV, he mentioned Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam, my brother or sister, whoever it is. What's the name of the book the brother wrote? Let's finish it off on this. It's a good way to finish as well. The book is called Defining Legends, and it is a Dar al-Arqam print publisher, analysis of Afrocentric writings against Islam. Abdul Haq, where can someone purchase this book if they wanted it? How would they go about getting a copy of this book?
Yeah, they can get a copy either from IDC. I think IDC have got copies for sale.
Yeah, we have some. Yeah, if anyone wants them, we've got some copies.
Yeah, so that's sufficient. Contact IDC.
Why not? We can't get it on Amazon just yet, then, bro. We need to.
It is on Amazon as well.
It is on Amazon. Okay.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah.
So it's widely available.
Yeah, it's widely available.
Inshallah. And then if anyone wants to get it from us, you can just email us or contact us, and I'll arrange a copy to be sent out. Jazakumullah khair, my brothers. It was a very good session, a bit longer than normal, but I think it was worthwhile. There was a lot to cover in that one session. So Jazakumullah khair, Abdul Haq, for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time out to be with us this evening. Jamaal, Isa, Jazakumullah khair as usual. Evening. We've got an online conference tomorrow, which starts at 10 p.m. and it's on the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, a role model for humanity. So that's from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. We've got a whole list of guest speakers coming on: Abu Osama, Yusuf Chambers, Abdurrahim McCarthy, Ilyas Karmani, Imam Walid. There's a whole speakers going to be on there. So make sure everybody tunes in 10 p.m. tomorrow and joins that, inshallah. So that'll be tomorrow's late show, inshallah. So I really look forward to that. On that note, Jazakumullah khair, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.